For this pitch, I'll be focusing on transportation infrastructure in the Northern Virginia area, and my talk specifically caters to decision makers and lawmakers in the area, as well as members of transportation organizations like VDOT and the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Quimby, and I'd like to introduce to you my carbon reduction pitch for the 2025 Green Bowl, EcoLink, a path to transportation emission reduction. Starting off with a little bit about myself, my name is Betsy Quimby, and I'm a senior at George Mason University. I'm majoring in civil and infrastructure engineering, and for me, that comes with a focus on sustainability, clean energy, and infrastructure in my studies. Aside from this, I'm also the team captain of the ASCE Sustainable Solutions team this year, where we're working to develop a sustainable site plan for a redevelopment project. I've also had some experience through internships with redevelopment and transportation engineering, which inspired my process for this challenge. Next, let's talk a little bit about the different opportunities that I explored in the process of the Green Bowl this year. In my sustainability classes, we've talked a lot about the triple bottom line and the elements of people, planet, and prosperity. So when choosing my project, I wanted to focus on these three elements. Starting out, I thought about people, considering which stakeholders would be involved and how to create a community within this sustainability project. With a focus on planet, I thought about green infrastructure and having a mix of natural and environmental ecological solutions. And for the prosperity aspect, I wanted to focus on a project that'll create accessible solutions, allow for economic indicators, and create a financial return for any stakeholders. So when I first started thinking about ways to reduce carbon emissions, I thought about my location. Some places that came to mind first were Fairfax, where my university is located, and the general Northern Virginia area, as well as Washington, D.C. And I also thought a lot about some of the major carbon emissions generators on campus. So this included transportation impacts associated with commuter students, and I also wanted to look at our secondary SciTech campus, which is often overlooked for a lot of sustainability projects. I also thought a lot about opportunities for renewable energy, so thinking about things like wind and biomass and how these could possibly be implemented to reduce carbon emissions on campus. I also looked towards the construction industry, which I've learned a lot about in my studies with topics like embedded carbon and different material uses. But finally, I landed on transportation, and this included electric vehicles and looking at public transit access. After deciding to focus on transportation and its impacts on carbon emissions, I wanted to think of ways that the transportation systems in Northern Virginia could be improved to help carbon neutral goals. I took a look at some of the different systems around the country for inspiration, and first I found the bus rapid transit lanes that are used in San Francisco. These allow buses in these lanes to travel faster and allow for more reliable transportation with the BRT buses, and they've helped encourage an increase in ridership. Next, I took a look at the Metro Mover system in Miami, and this is a free public transit system that's available to Miami residents and visitors, and it provides a more accessible way for people to get around. And finally, I looked at the Utah Valley Express, which I'll talk more about later. And this was another BRT transportation improvement project, and the implementation of these systems in Utah brought improvements in carbon emissions. They brought them down by 25%. So this brings me to my project, which is called EcoLink, and it focuses on reducing emissions from transportation. So thinking about some of the rationale and why I chose this project, the goal with EcoLink is to decrease single rider vehicle trips while still providing a means for transportation. Specifically, I found that transportation accounts for around 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in total. And as I was going to be focusing on carbon emission reduction for this whole project, I knew this would be a great place to start. I know that high volumes of single occupancy vehicles are a really big contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions, and given this fact, I wanted to find a way to increase the availability and accessibility of mass transit solutions. I knew that reasonably, completely eradicating passenger vehicles was not going to be very feasible, so I wanted to find a way to provide sustainable transportation solutions without having to alter people's daily lives and activities. So some things I wanted to focus on with the project specifically were the sustainability goals. I know that with a project like this, I would need to find ways to connect with the localities they would be installed in. And one way to do that is looking at their current sustainability goals and finding ways to tie my project in with that. So if they currently have goals to decrease carbon emissions, that would be a great place to start and tie that in with their transportation emissions. Another aspect for the rationale for this project was thinking about the infrastructure changes and thinking about increasing and improving the physical public transit infrastructures for users. In addition to that, I also thought about some of the policy changes and how some of the future goals might include increasing ridership overall for public transit and increasing accessibility in general. So to get a little bit more specific about what EcoLink is and how this project would be executed, the main aspect of the project is the transportation infrastructure. So the first element is having BRT or bus rapid transit lanes and bus lanes in general. Thinking about the infrastructure for transportation in Northern Virginia, many of the highways are multi-lane highways, and they don't have specific access lanes for buses or public transit aside from the metro lines. And part of EcoLink focuses on converting some of the existing travel lanes to bus-only lanes for either part of the day or permanently. In addition to increasing some of the transportation infrastructure, I also thought about decreasing infrastructure for single occupancy vehicles, and that specifically focuses on parking. So in cases where there is less accessible parking, this is sort of a disincentive for people to use single occupancy vehicles and might encourage them to take the more sustainable option of public transit. This also provides a way to increase green spaces in urban areas. Aside from the main focus of infrastructure, there are also some other things that come along with the project, and this includes incentives and accessibility. So in terms of incentives, thinking back to that triple bottom line, especially with prosperity, we want to think about having transit for all. One thing is removing the cost barrier and using public transit. So this can either mean increasing the total cost that it takes for a single occupancy vehicle to make a trip, or it can refer to decreasing the cost for riding public transit. Additionally, increasing the dependability of these public transit systems to increase the ridership and increase attention and funding to the transportation system so that people are able to trust the transit systems to get them where they need to be on time. And the final aspect is accessibility. And this focuses on multimodal solutions. So we're not leaving people stranded at the bus stop once they get off of public transit, but they're able to make it to their destination quickly and safely. Additionally, we want to focus on ADA accessibility and providing options for transit users of all different abilities. So taking a closer look at the emission reduction and sustainability of my proposed project, starting out, one study in a metropolitan area in Utah showed that their implemented BRT system diverted about 8,000 tons of CO2 emissions. Additionally, they found that trends were showing an 8% reduction in traffic when these BRT lanes were installed. The direct carbon emission reduction is one important aspect, but another aspect of EcoLink is the indirect carbon reductions. So when we reduce traffic slowdowns on highways, vehicles are able to function way more efficiently, and therefore they can produce less emissions with the gas that they are using. Then focusing on the other aspects of EcoLink, like creating green spaces from parking structures, this provides more emission reductions in the form of adding carbon sinks like trees and native plants into urban areas. Additionally, they provide stormwater solutions, which is another sustainable aspect of the project. And finally, there's also the option to introduce electric vehicles with these BRT systems. And while these do need to take power from somewhere, this can often be from a cleaner energy source as opposed to petroleum-based fuels like passenger vehicles use. So some of the obstacles that we may encounter with the implementation of this project include finances, sustainability, locations, and accessibility. In terms of finances, we know that large-scale transportation changes often require intensive research, engineering, and planning studies. So incorporating EcoLink into master planning and future planning especially will make this a more sustainable option in terms of implementation. And infrastructure changes can sometimes be unsustainable and cause more harm to the environment. So we want to really focus on sustainable and eco-friendly building practices during the implementation. Thinking about locations, one of the big issues with implementing public transit on a mass scale is that it's a lot harder to create these connections between major cities and across state lines. So this is one obstacle where people may still need to have a car for longer trips, and Focusing solely on public transportation might not be an option, and this might decrease their likelihood to use public transit if they still have to rely on a car for some trips. And finally, with accessibility, some multimodal transit options can be difficult for riders with physical disabilities, so it's important to think about how we can cater to all users. In order to implement the practices that come along with the EcoLink program, I took a look at some of the current goals and initiatives in Northern Virginia transportation circles. And one of the goals, starting out with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, is to increase transit capacity, and adding BRT lanes would do exactly that. Another one of their goals is to increase connection and mobility, which again aligns exactly with the values of EcoLink. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transportation Association has goals to focus on environmental sustainability, as well as safety, reliability, and convenience. Particularly, EcoLink aligns with that environmental sustainability initiative and decreasing carbon emissions overall by decreasing the amount of single-use riders on the roads. The city of Fairfax also has master planning goals to include more active transit options, so things like pedestrians and cyclists. And the city of Arlington has a direct goal to decarbonize the transportation system. Again, this directly aligns with the goals of EcoLink. Now, bringing this all together and focusing on the actual implementation of EcoLink, my ask is that we focus on new infrastructure projects that increase public transit as a whole. This includes increasing bus lanes and BRT lanes and implementing green spaces. In addition to this, I want to focus on increasing funding for existing public transit to make the current systems more accessible and increase ridership, as well as decrease the single car trips and allow more people to take public transit in their day-to-day lives. And finally, we need to implement solutions for the last mile. Once again, making sure that users aren't stranded at the bus stop when they end that part of the trip, but they have a multimodal way to get all the way to their destination. This includes things like capital bike share or creating improved walking paths for people to reach the final goal of their destination. Thank you all for your time and investment in decreasing carbon emissions and working towards a more sustainable future with EcoLink.